So chapter 2, Genesis, is a re-going over of some of the creation events described in chapter 1, specifically concentrating on man and mankind. What we covered last week, again, is Adam and Eve being placed in the garden, being given some rules, and also it talks about, not really sure why it talks about, but it mentions how the rivers run out, describing some different territories and whatnot. We get down to verse 15, and then we discussed last week that God actually puts man in the garden and actually gives him a job. Sometimes we have the idea that everything was kind of hunky-dory fine. He didn't have to do anything until after the fall. He had a job before. He was supposed to take care of the garden. Mentioned about it's easier to take care of something that's well maintained. You only have to do it like a little bit every day, as opposed to coming in on the backside if it's all destroyed and you got to get it in a good order. That takes a lot more work. So that was his job day to day.
He also had to name all that animals.
Yeah, that's coming up here in verse 20. We're going to get to where God starts bringing forth the creation before him. And words are different back then, I guess, than for us. Or whenever I call Cody gets a name, Cody. Well, that's probably a bad example because it's actually Dakota. Or my name, Chris. There's not necessarily a whole lot of meaning behind it, or not a descriptive meaning behind it. Back then, when they get their name, Adam, the man, it means red. They guess it came from the idea of maybe he was formed out of the red dirt that you see around central Texas more than down here, right? Don't know, but it's a descriptive term. Eve, the mother of all living, the mother of living. The names had meanings. So whenever he's going to bring the animal before Adam, and God says God is watching to see what he's going to name them, he's naming them descriptive terms. It might be a one word like monkey or something, but it actually meant something. It was a descriptive term, so that's going to happen as well.
You said Adam means what? Red?
Red.
I don't understand.
Red. It has the idea of red. It's actually, I think the word it broke down, it means the man, but it also has a connotation of red. And if people assume by that, it's a color red, that maybe the dirt over there was red where he was formed. And that's just guessing. That's just guessing, right? That's just postulation is all that is. Well, I just probably made that up, so don't put any stock. Don't write that down. I'll try to divide between what is scripture and what is opinion. A lot of what I say is opinion. I try to highlight that. So that's just inference, not necessarily binding anything, just something interesting, right? So we get to where we actually have rules. Verse 16, very specific. I say rules. It's rule, singular. And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, of every tree of the garden thou mayest freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat of it. For in the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Had Adam at this point, and we don't know exactly how much time has passed, but a little bit of time has passed, has Adam witnessed anything die?
No, because it said he died.
Not yet.
They were open after that.
Right, but if an animal died, that wouldn't necessarily involve sin or anything necessarily. But he hasn't, to our knowledge, again, he's never witnessed anything die. So, again, assumption. God would have to explain to him what that is. If you use a term that no one's ever understood, you're like, I tore my ACL. If you have no idea what that means, you're like, okay, you want to go for a jog? No, I tore my ACL. I can't do anything, and it hurts really badly. You need some explanation of actually what that is. So again, he's told if he does this, he's going to die. Now later on, we get to chapter 2, when the serpent tempts Eve and she described it, they understood, at least in a sense, maybe not in its fullest sense, of what that meant. Because otherwise, if you didn't understand what the punishment was, like if you never had a spanking and your dad tells you, you're going to get a spanking, okay, whatever that is, I'm going to eat the candy, or whatever he told you not to do. And then you get the spanking, I'm not going to do that anymore, because I'm not going to go through that road anymore. It's bad times, right? So, again, we infer that he had to explain what death was. Any comments on that, Joel?
He's actually speaking to him in words also.
Right, that are
so
scripture.
There's a whole understanding, and then to be talking about things that have not been seen before. You're right. There's be training and understanding.
Okay. So the next little section of scripture, anybody have any questions or comments on that? The next little section here is basically, sorry?
When Adam was created, don't think he was created with a certain amount of knowledge anyway?
Possible. We talked about the idea that physically he was created, full age, or he looked like a man. He might have had a base knowledge. True.
He didn't start a baby talk or anything like that. He was created man.
Right.
And with understanding, with knowledge.
That's why I say it's kind of what you inferred. Either there had to be an explanation, or he had to have the understanding given to him in some way, either through a verbal explanation or it was just given to him. He understood. One of the two.
Chris, I was reading something last night that it was, not that it's really in line with what we believe in. We got to be careful of it because it was making some comment about here, and we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit also in this comment, but it says, where for the day that thou eatest thereof, thou shalt surely die. Well, in the comment, in this commentary, it said, obviously God changed his mind because Adam didn't die.
Oh.
So we got to get in, there's some different interpretation of what they mean by this day and die.
Right.
I think they got kind of a far out there interpretation of what it means by that. It wasn't necessarily the physical death.
Right.
But that was kind of the end of it.
And again, you got to understand, and we'll talk about this more in chapter 2 when it happens. But there's going to be different types of death discussed, right? There's going to be the physical death, which you're right. He wasn't struck dead like Uzzah touching the ark. It wasn't that type of. Is it Uzzah? Who touched the ark? Okay, so make sure my name's right. It wasn't that type of event. It was sin. It was sin that separates us from God. That separation is a type of death. And it also began the death process. They began dying, because what else, when that happened, what were they denied access to that was also in the garden? The tree of life. So, again, they died spiritually because they were separated from God. They needed some type of reconciliation, and all this is going to happen in the next couple of chapters here, right? A lot of things are going to begin to happen that's going to fix this problem that's introduced right here. But also, physical death is introduced.
It could also be like a scare tactic. Like they might not completely understand or grasp the meaning of die or death. So because they haven't experienced it or have seen it. So this could just be God's way of saying, don't eat of it or thou shalt surely die. And when you hear that, you're like, okay, I don't want to experience that.
Yeah, and I would be careful with the term scare tactic, though, because sometimes parents use a scare tactic. Oh, 1, 2,
right.
1, 2, and so trying to scare the child without actually following through on the punishment. God, in no doubt, followed through on the punishment. But you're right; He was trying to tell him, you do not want to go down this road, and He tells us that all the time. You don't want to do this. That's what the whole Bible is about, right? It's about sin, defining sin. You don't want to do this. You don't want to drink. It's going to lead to really bad things. You don't want to, have sex outside of marriage. It's going to lead to a lot of heartache and bad. All these things that God tried to tell us that people want to look at as, He's trying to restrict me from having a happy life. No. He's trying to say, don't do this. It's going to be very, very hard on you in this life and in the life to come if you go down this path. And so,
chapter 3, verse 22, the Lord said, behold, the man has become one of us, to know good and evil, and now that he put forth his hand and taken also of the tree of life and eaten and lived forever.
right.
So he
became like God in a sense that he did know good and evil, and that's actually that's actually what Satan told them, which was actually partially a concern of God's. When that happened, you can't be that way and live forever. There's got to be an end to all this, right? And so, not in like God in the fullest sense. They weren't going to become gods, but they were going to become like God. In fact, that they understood what right and wrong was. They actually understood the evil side of it now.
I think of it as, I think it's when we're reading about Noah. I think it was when Noah was talking about the world around them. that their thoughts on evil continually.
Continually.
I think at this point, it was just the opposite. They didn't even have the concept or the idea of evil.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't, that just wasn't thoughts of even.
They had one rule. They had one rule. Just don't eat that tree.
Yeah.
That everything else was,
Yeah.
there was no wrong in anything else they did. It was just him and her, and whatever they did was fine. Just don't eat that tree. And they couldn't do that. So appreciate the comments. Let's go through, finish up chapter 2 at the very least. And we'll discuss the first basically surgery. If for lack of a better word, that's what's going to happen, right? Rig, are you on chapter 2?
Chapter 2?
Are you there in Genesis chapter 2?
Yeah.
All right, read 18 through go ahead and read the whole chapter, 18 through 25.
And the Lord God said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will take him a helper comparable to him. Out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air, and brought them to Adam to see that he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. So Adam gave names to all cattle, to the birds of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helper comparable to him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman. And he brought her to the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And they were both naked, and the man and his wife were not ashamed.
Okay, so here again we see it's interesting to me that God, knowing all things, when he made creation, he still brought them before man, and the word that used to see what he would name them. Again, we assume God knew what he was going to name them, but it's just interesting that God is watching man with his free will and free choice what he does, how he's going to make his decisions. So he's watching Adam and what he does. Adam names all the animals. We talked about that already, about how the words had descriptive meanings, more so that are that we've lost some of today. We don't have that as much today. And then, after he gets through naming all creation, a glaring lack is seen in creation at this point, that there's not someone there for man. I would assume at this time that all the animals had male and female. They had partners, but there was not a partner. The King James says meet. What did yours say? It said compatible or comparable for man? Comparable friend. There wasn't a partner equal for man. So God had made creation just by forming everything out of the dusty ground. This, he does an extra step. He actually causes a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. He performs the surgery, if you will, opens up something, the side of his body, takes out a rib, closes it back up, and then uses that as the base to form woman. And then, Adam gets woken up and brings her before Adam, and Adam calls her woman. Why do you think God did that extra step there as opposed to the other animals of creation?
Because man is a soul for woman.
Man is a soul. Okay. Any other thoughts? Yes, Cody?
Well, if you think in Hebrews 10 in verse 1, it tells us that the things before were a shadow of the things to come relating to Christ. And so the intimate formation of woman kind of displays the intimacy between Christ and the church and the interconnection between the two.
Okay. These are all this is not really necessarily a wrong answer because it doesn't tell us. It's just, what do you think that there might be some example or some things we can draw from that. I think that the idea, again, animals and all that were created separately, but woman is created out of man to show just an intimacy there, that she is not just a created thing like an animal. She's actually part of man, always going to be physically tied to one another, man and woman.
Well, it might be why the man is no good with the woman, like in a relationship or anything like that.
That's going to happen. I think that's going to happen later. That is true. But the reasons for that, I think, are going to be more explained. Not so much what happens with the rib. At least there's not a tie that I can see. I could be wrong. I might have not thought of it yet. But the reasons are going to be given in chapter 3 for that. What's going to happen there? They're going to be twofold. They're going to be due to her being deceived, the one that was actually deceived, and then actually the sin that she did. Adam sinned as well, but it was actually the one who was deceived, the one who sinned originally and brought it to Adam, and was instrumental in taking him down as well.
Well, verse 19, it says, out of the ground the Lord formed every beast of the field and every bird. And so, like I said, man had dominion over the animals.
Mm-hmm.
So, because he could have formed, well, I guess he made Adam that way, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I guess kind of just the compare, Adam didn't look like the animals.
Right.
So, like you said, he didn't have a helper that was comparable to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he was created in the same way, but they were all made out of dirt.
Yeah.
But again, God said, "Let's make man in our image." We talked about that, the past couple of weeks. Then you have woman being taken out of man again, and I really think that at this point, again, this is inference. This is completely my opinion, that there was a different state before the fall than after. I think there have been more help meet comparable to Adam. I don't think necessarily that Adam was over necessarily Eve at that time. It was after the fall. There's consequences, and the consequences are lifelong. Not speaking of the earth's history now, that are going to be set in different places. That's a complete inference, but I think that you could argue that case.
Well, down, when Adam says, "This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh," so that makes them more.
Yes,
in fact,
together, right. A
because she was
partnership.
taken out of man.
That's
So,
right. I think that's the general point you can make right there. That is what is being brought out with that happening. All good comments, questions, appreciate it.
Chris, in verse 24, is that Adam talking, or is that just continuation of his thought?
That's a really good question. Where he said that it says, because 23 says, Adam said this is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, because she's taken out of man. Whoever is actually speaking in verse 24, it's definitely giving a divine directive, whether it's coming through the mouth of Adam as inspiration in a sense, or actually God taking over and speaking there. It's being a decree that's going to stand. And I've also thought it interesting too, is like, it's creation of woman, right? But 24, verse 24 addresses the man. He says, therefore, when a man, not the woman, you think about the woman leaves her family and joins the man family. What it actually is saying here was the man leaves his family and creates a new family whenever he gets married. You see all kinds of problems in relationships, whether it's a son or a daughter, where someone will get married, but still is kind of in their original family's camp, if you will, as opposed to this new family that they've started. Or, you see it both ways, either from the people who get married or from the parents of those who get married. Parents want to be, hey, you do this, hey, you do that. They want to control this new thing. And I've even heard some people argue that they're still part of their household. It's just, that's not right. I won't say that's crazy town. That's not right. They have started a new household. They are leaving and cleaving to each other. They are their own. Can you advise? Can you help them? Yes, by all means. You don't make decisions for them. They're not subject to you anymore. Speaking of your kids, when they get married, they are their own family unit now. They're going to stand before God and answer for themselves. So there's problems on both sides of that if that dictum is not followed, right? It's said and it's true for a reason. Not the way it's supposed to be. Yes, sir.
Me back to the question that Frank asked. This isn't the man speaking, 24, 25. This is God speaking, giving orders now that man and woman are they're separate. Up in verse 23, we have what man said in quotation marks. It stops there at the end of 23.
Okay, mine doesn't have.
God speaks in 24. This is the way it's going to be.
Okay, mine doesn't have quotation marks. Mine is not included. And even if it had quotation marks, that would have to be inserted by the translator. Yeah.
I know to say what man said.
Sir?
And it's quoting, this is what man said. And so the quotation marks said, this is the quote man said. Now, verse 24 and 25, this is what God's saying. He wants written in His Word that we're talking about mother and father now and marriage and everything else, which Adam and Eve didn't go through marriage.
That would make sense. And I said, because it's not, I said, mine doesn't have quotes. I don't know how they would get those quotes. That would have to be like an interpreter's interpretation. But regardless if Adam actually said it or actually God was speaking there, in either case it would be coming from God.
Yes.
In either case it would be coming from God as a rule, as a thing for man to follow.
But Adam didn't know mother and father.
Correct. That's the point he's making. He wouldn't understand that concept, or not understand. He wouldn't have had that concept of having a mother or father.
This is in the recording time too, whenever Moses
Right. This is written after the fact. So whenever you have things, even that are from interpretation, that are written after the event happened, sometimes because they know what happened and what's happening afterwards, they put things in those texts that are correct, that just wouldn't have had a bearing on them at the time they were happening. Does that make sense? They knew what was going on, that there was going to be marriage and stuff subsequent, and so that's what happened here was defining that, even though Adam and Eve necessarily wouldn't have any really a concept of that being defined at that time, because they would have seen it.
God's rolling out the picture.
Yes.
Adam and Eve necessarily don't understand everything at the time.
Correct. That's what I'm trying to say, as convoluted as it was.
Jesus repeats verse 24 in Matthew 19.
Yes. Whenever jumping way ahead, all the way to the time of the New Testament, whenever Jesus' question on the marriage and divorce question, he goes back to this right here and uses this is how God created it, this is how God intended it, and man has come up with many a false idea since that time. True. That's so funny. Look at my time. Okay. I appreciate the comments. And then the last little bit, again, they don't have a concept of sin or shame or anything at this time. Not that there would necessarily them being together and without clothes be any shame in a marriage relationship anyway. There's no shame at all when you're in your 20s, maybe in your 40s and 50s. There gets to be some shame as things start to change physically. But at that time, when they were perfect in creation, there was no shame. There's no embarrassment, right? I probably shouldn't have said that. That was very wrong. Chapter 3. We're going to go right to chapter 3. Chapter 3 is a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in chapter 3. Isn't even a good place to stop. Let's just do the first three. Let's do it real slow. 3 verses. Read first 3 verses, chapter 3, please, sir.
First 3 verses?
First 3 verses of chapter 3.
Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he says to the woman, as God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden. But the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.
Okay. So again, there's just so much stuff going on. A serpent, in whatever form a serpent had at that time, because the form of the serpent is going to change after the fall, comes up to Eve and begins talking to Eve. What other place in the Bible do we have where an animal speaks to man? Balaam. Balaam is what? Donkey. And to me, what kills me in both recorded instances, that when the serpent talks to Eve, when the donkey talks to Balaam, they talk back. It doesn't record a reaction of complete shock. Because like I said, if I'm going out there and the chickens start talking to me, I don't think I'm going to have a conversation with them because I'm going to be kind of dumbfounded for a while that a chicken's talking to me. But if that reaction is had, it's not recorded. Balaam we can understand, because the donkey asked Balaam, why are you hitting me? And he's in a rage, because the donkey's not going where he wants. And I can understand that, because I've tried to work with animals, and they don't go, or kids, they don't go where you want to beat them to death. And that's what he says. Man, I wish I didn't have a stick in my hand. I wish I had a sword. I'd kill you. So out of anger, you can see him saying that. Well, Eve doesn't seem to be. There's no like an emotional heightened case going on. The serpent just rolls up to Eve and goes, what did God say you could do? And she responds back. To me, that's again, there's nothing there. It's just interesting to me. Now the question, verse 3. What did God tell him the rule was? And what part did Eve add when she recited the rule back to Satan? Yeah. What did God tell him? You shouldn't eat it. And Eve restates that. And then she adds something else. What does she add? We don't eat it. We're not even supposed to touch it. Now, we don't know if God actually told them that too. It's not recorded. Or if Adam, in delivering the instruction, said, hey, it's like with your kids, right? Let's do something to them. We don't want you to drink. We don't want you to go into a bar. We don't want you to go anywhere they might serve alcohol. You go beyond that, because if this line is the sin line, metaphorically speaking, I don't want you here. I want you as far over here as you can possibly get. So Eve understood it. We're not supposed to eat it. We're not even supposed to touch it, which is a good thing. And that's a biblical principle, right? Someone turn over to 1 Thessalonians 5:22. Or someone that knows what that says, tell me what that says.
Abstain from every appearance of evil.
Abstain from every appearance of evil. Again, don't see how close you can get. Get away from the very appearance of it. Eve had that. Eve understood that. And yet, Satan is not discouraged. Here he goes, right? Here is what he's going to begin to do. Rig. 4-6.
The serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate.
All right. So what does Satan do? Verse 4. He lies in a sense, right? And we talked about it a little bit in the early part of class, the idea that they weren't struck down like Uzzah. So maybe he's using a little different form of die there. He's not going to be struck dead. But he's definitely lying, because what is he described as? When Christ talks about him, he said, he's a liar from the beginning. When he speaks a lie, he's speaking of his own, because that's the language he deals in, right? And I always joke around with Katie, and I tell her, what's the most effective lie? There's two things you can do. If you want to be an effective liar, if you want to have a course online, which I'm not going to have, but if you want to have a course online, and you want to be an effective liar, put as much truth as you can in with the lie. Because they're going to be like, oh, that's true. I know that part is true. This part I'm not so sure about. But he said other stuff there. I know that's true. So now you've got them. And then you also, if you want to be an effective liar, you tell people something they want to believe. That's the easiest lie to tell. You tell somebody something they want to believe, you got them halfway there. And Satan uses it both. One, you're not going to die. Using a play on words, perhaps, what he's doing there to describe her. Also, he's going to compound it when he gets down here. He says, we talked about, remember my Devo on Wednesday night, I talked about the three types of temptation: the lust of the eye, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. And of those three things in this case, with the fruit, she says, it's pleasant to the eyes, it's good for food, it'll make us like God. Which of those three do you think is the most tempting? The pride of life. Because they had tons of fruit out there. They were all probably really good in all different ways, so there's no need for this one to be special. But that third one that appeals to man's pride, you're going to be like God. Ooh.
He also told her that you would know good and evil.
Right, but that's how she was going to become like God. And knowing good and evil, too, again, since they didn't have necessarily evil, that probably wasn't that big deal. But I think the hook of the lie was, you're going to be like God. I think that got her.
They had lots of power.
Yeah, everything that comes with it, right? I can be like God. The person, the entity that created all this stuff we see, I can be like that. Yeah, give me some of that. I'll take a little dose of that. And that's, again, it's the appeal of man to everybody, try to fight inside themselves about, oh, I'd like to have control, and then relinquishing control. Again, the idea of the parents with their kids, when they get married, they want to have that control. It's hard to let go of that and say, go do your own thing. And so that's, I believe, how he got to her. Someone read John 8:44 for me, please.
Ye are your father the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it.
So again, the descriptive term of the devil, what he is. He's going to appeal to you with lust. He's going to tell you lies. Again, you think of this, of all the things. I always come back to drinking just because it's an easy one, right? When you watch the commercials for alcohol, what do they show?
Good times.
Good times. Good times. Whenever the peer pressure you get starting, who knows how early it starts, junior high, high school to drink. What is the peer pressure? Fun, come be like us, be the popular group, all that type of stuff. Does the alcohol industry ever show the crash, the DWIs, the family separated, the alcoholic father beating his kids? Do they show any cirrhosis? People living on the street, do they show that? No. That's Satan taking his pound of flesh in this life and then taking his pound of flesh in the next. But that's not what they show.
John 8:44 also says he's a murderer from the beginning.
Correct. Because that's what he's doing right here. Even though he's not sticking a knife in them, even though it's not Uzzah touching the ark to be straight, he killed them with this lie. He separated them from God, which is a type of death. That's what he did effectively right here.
Well, it's a death with it, so it actually.
And it actually began the process for physical death, as we're going to get to see if we get to it right here. The last thing, this section right here, where he says in verse 5, he tells them that you shall be like gods. What does it say in verse 22 of this same chapter? Someone read that.
The Lord God said, Behold, the man has become as one of us, to know good and evil. And now, lest he put forth his hand, and take also of the tree of life, and eat and live forever.
So again, that part of the statement that Satan used to him was true. That's what God came back and said. He's become as, not in the complete sense, but more similar to us in this sense, knowing good and evil. So that part of the story that, again, that Satan was spinning was true in a sense, but probably not true in the sense as Eve was taking it. Now, you can say things that are technically true, but knowing full well the way you're saying them, the person's going to take them in a way that is not true, and that is still a lie, because you're deceiving that person. You're knowingly deceiving that person. And that's what Satan's doing. Again, the effective lie, partial truth, or truth in a sense, but knowing how it's going to be taken is incorrect or false. That is lying. That's what he was from the beginning. That's how he's described. Any comments on that? So, Eve was deceived. This is going to come into play as far as the difference in relationship between man and woman. And then what else did she do to compound her error in verse 6? She took it to her husband. It's bad enough when you take sin upon yourself. But then when you spread it, that's even worse. Go ahead, Cody.
I think the issue that they came across is, they were careful in the aspect of they knew not to eat of it, and then they also went as far as to say don't even touch it. But it seems like as if Satan went and put it in her hand. I just say that because if she looks and see that it's good for fruit, how's she going to look and see it? She has to inspect it. She's already seen it with her eyes. She knows to evade it. She knows what it looks like. She knows where it is. But she doesn't know that she can hold it in her hand and have no physical consequence. And so it's held in her hand. And so I guess really whenever you're looking at it, obviously, they don't have the comprehension that they needed about the severity of sin and of that nature. But, maybe it's a lesson for us to not just fortify your mind with good principles, but with an understanding of the severity of sin. Because we can look at alcohol and we can make the argument that the liberal makes and say, well, what's wrong with one sip? What's wrong with this? I've touched it and it's not doing anything to me. and then just leads to a slippery slope.
Right, it's a misconception, like, I take a drink, put it down, nothing happens. Take another at a different time. And it's just a progressive nature of sin. I can handle it. And the way the man lies to himself, I can handle it. I can handle it. You go talk to the alcoholic guy who's stumbling dead drunk in the street, and you ask him, are you handling this? I got this under control. Yeah, you don't have a home, you don't have a family, you don't have a job, but yeah, you got this under control. He's deceived, right? But it's a progressive nature. And again, about your thought about being in proximity, or the serpent bringing it to Eve. I don't know if the serpent he brought it to her, but she was definitely in proximity of it, right? Because it says, wherever they're having this discussion, there it is. She starts making this evaluation, and she had it. So they were close enough in proximity of what they shouldn't have been, or what they shouldn't have been around to have this discussion. Satan caught her when she was close to it.
Yeah, because she talks about the tree.
Yep.
And when the woman saw that the tree was good.
Yep. She was in eyesight of it, right?
That's right.
Just like when Peter denied Christ the third time, and the rooster crows. I forget whose gospel account says that Jesus looked at him.
Yeah.
He was in eyesight with him when he did it. So she was in eyesight at least of the tree. This discussion is happening. Huh? Yeah.
But you're talking there, I kind of had the same thought about Adam. And there's a lot of things we don't know. We don't hear the phrase that said here at the end of verse 6. We're talking about Eve, but it said, and gave also unto her husband with her. So was he also there in close proximity? We're not told he's part of the discourse between Satan and Eve, or is the with her just he's with her there in the garden? I don't know.
Again, the assumption I've always made that Satan, he usually doesn't attack. That's again, it's the whole proverbial, lion with the herd of animals. He doesn't attack the herd. He gets someone off by themselves. Right. So I've always just made the assumption that this temptation is being brought to Eve when she's on the oak. The man, hey, don't leave listen to that. He talks to Eve, and then again, either way, with at the time or with brought to it, he knew better too.
Right.
And whatever was said or transpired when she brought it to him, he's just as guilty. Just as guilty. He should have said, he should have been like God said, what have you done? But he didn't. So he bears the sin as well. Whatever excuse he's going to give here in the next few verses, right? He bears the sin as well.
No matter if he was right there with the tree or with her or whatever, he did recognize the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
He should eat of it. So that fruit, of all the trees and all the fruits in the garden, something stands out about that one fruit, whatever it is, that they should eat of it.
Yeah, it was unique.
So whenever she lost it, he knows what it is.
Yeah, it wasn't like she disguised it
No.
and brought it to him. He knew. Is that the last bell?
Yeah, 5.
5 minutes, all right.
About 5 minutes.
5 minutes, good deal.
In 2 and 3, is there a distinction being made between where the woman said, we may eat the fruit of the tree that's in the garden, and then in verse 3 she says, but of the tree that's in the midst of the garden. Is there a distinction between the midst of the garden and the garden?
I don't know. I've always kind of thought it was in the middle, but when I hear midst, that's what I think of. But I don't know. Yeah, I just don't know. Wherever it was distinctive. Whatever it looked like, it was distinctive. So it wasn't like it was hidden, like an orange and a tangerine, but can't tell from the outside when they're small. It was distinctive placement and the fruit. And so they were without excuse, no matter what happened. Did you have something, Travis?
Well, at that day and time, in Genesis there, so it had never rained. All the water and everything come up from the ground. So I would consider it more of a mist. Mist has more than one meaning to it nowadays, but
Yeah, he was saying midst with a D in there, bad pronunciation, in the middle, not mist, midst. Sorry about that. Okay, let's read a few more verses.
I had one other question.
Yes, sir.
When it talks to become like one of us, is that talking about the Trinity, or what is it talking about there?
He's talking about becoming more God-like in a particular sense. And at this time, I think, especially in verse 22, he uses the term us. So he's talking about the plurality of the Godhead.
There at the time, so.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Yes.
It was a characteristic of the Godhead to know good and evil.
Correct.
And so he's hinting them with a characteristic. I'm sure his sell he wasn't selling it as, well, this one aspect will be like them. You're going to be like God.
Right. Go ahead.
I think just an interesting point about the temptation of becoming like God, and this is probably why they fell, is because they lost sight that they already were like God. They were created in God's image, and they were pure and they were holy in the state which they were living, and so they were as close to being like God as they could ever be. And so, with a lack of, I guess, appreciation perhaps for that,
Yep.
they grew distant. And,
Yeah. And I'll add this too, and I thought about this, and my thoughts come to me randomly kind of going. We talked about in the very first lesson about the time before time. We talked about there was a fall prior to this fall, a spiritual fall, right? What do you think, inference, what do you think caused Satan to fall? What was he trying to pull off?
You want to be like God. Be strong as God.
He wanted to be like God. He was not content. But it tells us in Jude, I think, that they left their habitation, they left their proper place. There was bounds put on the created angelic beings that we don't know. Whatever those bounds were, Satan wasn't happy with them. He wanted to go outside that. So that led to his downfall. So what is the very first temptation he brings to man? The very exact thing that got him, he brings to mankind. And it works on them, just like it worked on him. So again, we have our place. All have our place, whatever that place might be. If you're a child, you have a place in relation to your parents. If you're parents, you have a relation to your child. If you're a husband or wife, you have roles. If you're a man or woman in the church, you have roles. If you're a deacon, you have a role. If you're an elder, you have a role, right? You have a particular place. Work inside your habitation, your place. Don't always be the guilty or the weakness of man, like never being satisfied with what you have. I want that. I want to be what he has. I want to be what she has. Work inside your role. Be content with what you have. That's what God has asked of us. All right. Go ahead.
We always remind ourselves, we're always watching you. Maybe a young man, a young girl, something like that. If you want to conduct yourself, so if they want to be like you, they're conducting that thing to be right.
That's correct.
And pride moves people. So if you're doing something great, if you think it's great, well, why do you lead somebody else to do?
Right. Appreciate the comments. Like I said, we stopped at verse 6. We will do our very best to finish chapter 3 next week.